At a prestigious charity gala, a tense moment unfolds when a man refuses to shake Barron Trump's hand, accusing him of privilege and ignorance. The room falls silent. What happens next stuns everyone. Instead of walking away, Barron does something unexpected, sparking a chain of events that will change lives forever. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The grand gala shimmered with dazzling lights, the air thick with the hum of conversation, laughter, and the soft clinking of champagne glasses. Powerful figures from across the country, philanthropists, business moguls, celebrities, had gathered in the opulent ballroom, all in the name of charity. The purpose of the night was noble, raising funds for children in need. Yet, despite the elegance, there was an unspoken tension rippling beneath the surface, a tension that would soon come to a head. Barron Trump, standing near the stage, exuded a quiet confidence. Dressed in a classic black tuxedo, he appeared calm, unshaken by the overwhelming energy of the room. At only 19, he carried himself with the composure of someone well beyond his years. Unlike many in attendance, he wasn't here for the prestige or the spectacle. He was here because he truly cared. He moved through the room with effortless grace, shaking hands with guests, exchanging polite nods, and listening attentively to stories of charitable efforts. Then, without warning, the mood shifted. A man stepped forward from the crowd. He wasn't dressed like the others. His suit was wrinkled, his tie slightly loosened, as if he had lost interest in maintaining his appearance halfway through the night. His eyes, dark with emotion, locked onto Barron as he approached. Something was different about him. There was no warmth in his expression, no polite pretense, just raw, unfiltered emotion. Barron extended his hand. "It's nice to meet you," he said, his voice steady. The man didn't move, didn't flinch. He just stared at Barron's outstretched hand before shaking his head. "No," he said, his voice tight. "I won't shake your hand." A sudden, heavy silence fell over the room. Nearby conversations stopped. Eyes darted toward the pair, curiosity and unease flashing across their faces. A refusal like this, so public, so deliberate, was more than just an awkward social moment. It was a statement. Barron, unfazed, lowered his hand, but didn't break eye contact. "All right," he said simply, his tone neither defensive nor hostile. The man's jaw clenched. He took a breath, as if steadying himself, before finally speaking again. "Your name," he said, his voice laced with emotion, "represents privilege. You have no idea what people like me go through." A murmur ran through the crowd. Security tensed, ready to intervene, but Barron lifted a hand, silently telling them to stand down. He could feel the weight of the room pressing in, every gaze waiting for his reaction. He had a choice: dismiss the man, retaliate, or listen. Barron inhaled slowly. Then, with quiet resolve, he met the man's gaze and said something no one expected. "You're right. I don't know your story. But I'd like to." The man blinked, visibly caught off guard. The tension in his shoulders didn't vanish, but something in his eyes flickered, hesitation, uncertainty. He had expected rejection, not an invitation. Barron gestured toward a quieter corner. "Let's talk." For a moment the man hesitated. Then, reluctantly, he followed. And just like that, the most unexpected conversation of the night had begun. The two men sat at a small table in the farthest corner of the grand ballroom, away from the glittering chandeliers and the prying eyes of curious guests. The murmurs of onlookers slowly faded as the crowd turned back to the night's festivities, but a few discreet glances remained fixed on the unusual scene unfolding in the dimly lit corner. Barron Trump, composed yet attentive, sat across from the man who had just refused his handshake in front of an entire room of high-profile guests. The man, who had introduced himself as Jacob Carter, was still visibly tense, his fingers drumming lightly against the edge of the table, his shoulders stiff. Barron studied him for a moment, not with judgment but with genuine curiosity. He could tell Jacob wasn't just someone looking to cause a scene. There was something deeper, something unresolved in his eyes. Jacob broke the silence first, his voice rough and edged with frustration. "I know what this kind of event is," he muttered, shaking his head. "Rich people patting themselves on the back, throwing money at problems to make themselves feel better." His eyes darkened as he looked at Barron. "You wouldn't understand what it's like to actually struggle, to fight for something only to lose anyway." Barron didn't react defensively. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his expression calm but serious. "Then tell me," he said. "I want to understand." Jacob exhaled sharply, as if debating whether this conversation was even worth his time. But something in Barron's tone, sincere, patient, unwavering, made him continue. "I have a son," Jacob said, his voice cracking slightly. "His name is Ethan. He's 7. Smart kid, loves to draw, has a heart bigger than this whole damned city." He swallowed hard, then let out a bitter chuckle. "He also has a rare disease, one that requires treatments I can't afford." His eyes flashed with a mix of anger and grief. "I've worked myself to the bone, begged insurance companies, reached out to charities, but it's never enough. No one listens, no one really helps." His hands clenched into fists on the table. "And then I come here, and I see people writing checks without thinking twice, drinking champagne that costs more than my rent, acting like they've done their part." He let out a shaky breath, his voice lowering to almost a whisper. "Meanwhile, my son is running out of time." Barron felt something shift in his chest, a quiet but powerful ache. He had been to countless charity events, seen the dazzling donations, the publicized generosity, but this was real. A father sitting across from him, not asking for pity, not even asking for help, just trying to be heard. He met Jacob's gaze, steady and unshaken. "I can't pretend to know what you're going through," he admitted, "but I do care." Jacob let out a scoff. "That's easy to say." Barron didn't flinch. "Then let me prove it." Jacob frowned, his guard still up. "How?" Barron sat back for a moment, considering. Then he said simply, "First, tell me about Ethan." That caught Jacob off guard. He had expected condescension, a half-hearted offer, maybe even a check slid across the table to make him go away. Instead, Barron was asking about his son. Not his disease, not the money, just him. Jacob hesitated, but then something softened in his face. "Ethan loves superheroes," he admitted, his voice quiet, "but not the kind that fight bad guys. He likes the ones who create things. He says he wants to be an artist. He wants to paint the world happy." A small, wistful smile ghosted across his lips before fading. "But lately he hasn't had the energy. Some days he can't even hold a pencil without his hands shaking." Barron nodded, listening intently. He could see the pain in Jacob's expression, the weight of a father's helplessness. "Does he still draw when he can?" he asked. Jacob nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, his voice thick, "but mostly in his head. He tells me about all the pictures he wants to paint one day." Barron exhaled, making a decision in that moment. "I want to meet him." Jacob blinked. "What?" "I want to meet Ethan," Barron repeated. "Not as a press event, not as some big charity stunt, just as someone who wants to know him." Jacob studied him carefully, skepticism flickering across his face. "Why?" "Because you came here tonight thinking no one cared," Barron said. "I want to prove you wrong." Jacob was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching Barron's face for any sign of insincerity. When he found none, something in his expression wavered. Finally, he let out a slow breath. "All right," he said, "but no cameras, no press." Barron nodded. "Deal." As they stood, shaking hands this time, Jacob realized something strange. He had come to the gala filled with resentment, convinced that no one in this world cared about people like him. And yet, against all odds, the one person who had truly listened, who had looked past the suit and the surname and the expectations, was the one he least expected. And for the first time in a long time, Jacob felt something he thought he had lost. The morning air was crisp when Barron Trump stepped out of the black SUV parked in front of a modest apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. Dressed in a simple black sweater and jeans, he carried a small box wrapped in brown paper. Its contents carefully chosen after a late-night call with his assistant Clara. He had asked her to find the best sketchbooks, colored pencils, and paint sets available. Anything that could bring a spark of joy to a boy who had been fighting a battle far greater than any child should. Jacob Carter was waiting at the entrance, his posture tense, his face lined with both exhaustion and wariness. This was still surreal to him. A week ago, he had refused to shake Barron's hand at the gala, fueled by years of frustration and helplessness. Now, that same man, someone he had dismissed as another out-of-touch figurehead, stood on his doorstep, looking ready to walk into his world without cameras, without press, without any grand announcement. "Didn't think you'd actually come," Jacob admitted, crossing his arms. Barron met his gaze with a calm expression. "I told you I wanted to meet Ethan," he said simply. I don't say things I don't mean." Jacob studied him for a long moment before nodding. "All right," he said, stepping aside. "Come on in." The apartment was small but tidy, filled with remnants of a life built around a child's dreams. Crayon drawings decorated the fridge, stacks of medical bills sat carefully piled on the kitchen counter, and a half-finished painting rested on an easel by the window, the colors vibrant yet unfinished. And then, there he was. Ethan sat on the couch, a thin blanket draped over his small frame. He looked up as they entered, his wide brown eyes filled with curiosity and something else. Caution. His tiny hands clutched a stuffed bear, its fur worn from years of love. Jacob cleared his throat. "Ethan," he said gently, kneeling beside his son. "This is Barron. He wanted to meet you." Ethan studied Barron for a moment, his small fingers twisting the fabric of the bear's ear. Then, cautiously, he spoke. "You're the guy from the TV." Barron smiled, lowering himself to Ethan's level. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I'm also just a guy who heard you like to draw." The boy's expression brightened ever so slightly. "I do," he said, sitting up a little straighter. "But my hands don't always listen to me." Barron nodded, glancing at the unfinished painting by the window. "That's yours?" he asked. Ethan nodded. "I wanted to finish it," he said softly, "but I got too tired." Barron reached for the small box he had brought, placing it carefully on Ethan's lap. "I thought you might like this," he said. "It's not much, but I figured an artist should always have the best tools." Ethan's eyes widened as he carefully unwrapped the package, revealing the brand new set of art supplies. His fingers traced the smooth covers of the sketchbooks, the neatly arranged colored pencils, the soft brushes. His expression was a mixture of awe and disbelief. "For me?" he whispered. Barron nodded. "Every single one." For a moment, Ethan just stared at the gift, his small hands resting on top of it. Then, without warning, he launched himself forward, wrapping his thin arms around Barron's neck in a hug that was both surprising and heartbreaking. "Thank you," he whispered. Barron hesitated for only a moment before returning the hug, careful and gentle, as if he understood just how much weight this moment carried. Jacob, watching from the side, felt his throat tighten. He had spent years fighting alone, carrying the crushing weight of his son's illness on his shoulders, convinced that no one truly cared, and yet, here was someone he had once dismissed, kneeling on his living room floor, treating his son not like a charity case, but like a boy with dreams worth believing in. As the morning stretched into afternoon, Barron stayed longer than expected. He listened as Ethan talked about his favorite superheroes, about the stories he imagined and the worlds he wanted to paint. He even picked up a pencil himself, sketching alongside the boy as they laughed at his clumsy attempts. But between the laughter, Barron noticed something else. The way Jacob's shoulders remained stiff, the way he kept glancing toward the clock, the way his face darkened when he thought no one was looking. Later, as Ethan dozed off on the couch, his energy spent from the excitement of the morning, Barron turned to Jacob. "There's more, isn't there?" he asked quietly. Jacob sighed, running a hand over his face. The hospital bills, he admitted. They just keep coming. Every time I think I've got a handle on things, something else hits. I work 2 jobs, barely sleep, and it's still not enough. He looked at Ethan, his expression pained. I don't care about myself. But him? He deserves more. Barron was silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of those words. Then, quietly, he said, I want to help. Jacob shook his head. I'm not asking for... I know, Barron interrupted. But I don't want Ethan to just survive. I want him to thrive. Jacob hesitated. He had spent so long being let down by promises that never lasted, by help that came with strings attached. But Barron's voice held no expectation, no hidden agenda, just sincerity. Let me take care of the medical bills, Barron said. Let me get him the best treatment possible. Jacob exhaled sharply, his throat tight. Why, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, why do you care this much? Barron met his gaze, unwavering. Because I can, he said. And because he deserves it. Jaco mujos clay. Jacob swallowed hard. For years he had fought alone, and now, for the first time, someone was stepping in, not out of obligation, not for a headline, but because they wanted to. He nodded slowly. All right, he said, his voice thick with emotion. All right. And Barron reached out, shaking his hand firmly. Then let's make sure Ethan gets to paint the world happy. And in that moment, Jacob realized that this wasn't just about his son's health. It was about hope. It was about believing that sometimes, even in the darkest moments, kindness could find its way in. And maybe, just maybe, change everything. The late afternoon sun bathed the city in a golden glow as Barron Trump sat in the back seat of his SUV, staring out at the passing streets. His conversation with Jacob weighed heavily on his mind. There was a tightness in his chest, the kind that came with knowing you were about to change someone's life in ways they never expected. He had made up his mind. This wasn't just about covering Ethan's medical bills. This was about something far greater. The following morning, Barron made a series of phone calls. He had Clara contact top pediatric specialists across the country, ensuring Ethan had access to the best medical care possible. He personally reached out to a renowned children's hospital, securing a full evaluation for Ethan with specialists who had worked miracles before. Money wasn't an issue. Barron would pay for everything quietly, without any media, without any press. But something inside him told him that Ethan needed more than just doctors. He needed inspiration. He needed to see that his dream of being an artist wasn't just a fantasy. Barron had an idea. That evening, he made another call, this time to one of the most respected art galleries in the city. He explained Ethan's love for painting, his talent despite the struggles he faced. I want him to see that his dreams are real, Barron told the curator. I want him to meet people who live the life he envisions for himself. The curator, moved by Barron's sincerity, agreed immediately. The next day, Barron returned to Jacob and Ethan's apartment. He carried no reporters, no photographers, just himself, and another gift in hand. When Jacob opened the door, his expression was one of surprise. Didn't think we'd see you again so soon, he admitted, stepping aside. Barron grinned. Hope you don't mind unannounced guests. From the couch, Ethan looked up, his small frame still wrapped in a blanket. Barron. His face lit up, and he pushed himself upright. You came back. Barron set the package on the coffee table and sat beside him. Of course. And I brought something for you. Ethan's fingers trembled as he unwrapped the package, revealing a beautifully framed invitation with elegant lettering. An invitation to the most prestigious art gallery in the city. Ethan's mouth fell open. What? What is this? Barron leaned forward. You and I? We're going on a trip. This gallery wants you to see their work, to meet real artists. They want you to know that your art matters. The boy blinked at him, his small hands gripping the frame tightly. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. They want me there? Barron nodded. "You belong there, Ethan." Jacob, standing behind them, wiped at his eyes, struggling to contain his emotions. "You really didn't have to do all this," he said, his voice hoarse. Barron turned to him, his expression unwavering. "I did, because he deserves it." The following day, Ethan stood outside the grand doors of the gallery, clutching Barron's hand tightly. The boy's eyes were wide, reflecting the towering glass walls, the gleaming floors, the larger-than-life paintings that hung in the entrance. Jacob stood a step behind, looking equally overwhelmed. "I don't think I'm supposed to be here," Ethan murmured. Barron squeezed his hand gently. "Trust me, you are." They stepped inside, and almost instantly the curator approached, a warm smile on her face. "You must be Ethan," she said, kneeling to his level. "We've been waiting for you." He looked at Barron, as if seeking reassurance that this was truly happening. Barron nodded, and with a deep breath, Ethan followed the curator inside. The tour was unlike anything the boy had ever experienced. He saw works of art that stretched across entire walls, paintings that seemed to tell stories just by existing. The curator introduced him to artists who spoke about their journeys, how they had once been just like him, a child with a dream. At one point they stopped in front of a breathtaking painting of a young girl staring up at the stars. The strokes were bold, the colors vivid with emotion. Ethan studied it, his eyes shining. "You know," one of the artists said, crouching beside him, "every great artist starts just like you. They start with a dream, and they keep painting, no matter what." Ethan looked up at Barron, his voice quiet but filled with something new. Conviction. "I want to keep painting." Barron smiled. "Then we'll make sure you do." As the day drew to an end, the curator approached Barron with an idea. "His story is incredible," she said, glancing at Ethan as he excitedly talked to one of the artists. "What if we showcased one of his works, even if just for a day?" Barron's chest tightened. The thought of Ethan seeing his work displayed in a real gallery, of showing him just how much his talent mattered, was almost too perfect. He turned to Jacob. "What do you think?" Jacob, who had spent the entire day watching his son light up in a way he hadn't in years, didn't hesitate. "Let's do it." And so it was decided. Ethan's painting, unfinished but brimming with potential, would be displayed in the gallery's youth section. When Ethan was told, he gasped, his hands covering his mouth. "Really?" he whispered. "Really?" Barron confirmed. And then, to everyone's surprise, Ethan burst into tears. Jacob rushed to his side, alarmed. "Buddy, what's wrong?" But Ethan shook his head, sobbing softly. "I'm just happy." Barron swallowed the lump in his throat. He knelt beside Ethan and put a steady hand on his shoulder. "You deserve to be happy, Ethan," he said softly. "Never forget that." The boy nodded, wiping at his eyes. Then, with all the strength his small body could muster, he wrapped his arms around Barron in a hug so tight it made everyone in the room silent. Barron closed his eyes for a moment, holding back the emotion welling in his chest. This was why he had come. Not for recognition, not for a headline, but for this boy, for this moment, and for the hope that one act of kindness could spark something much, much bigger. The city skyline glowed under the evening lights as Barron Trump sat in his study, his thoughts still lingering on the moment he had left Ethan at the art gallery. The memory of the boy's wide eyes, the way he clutched his painting as if it were the most valuable thing in the world, it had stirred something deep within him. It wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about all the other children out there with dreams that seemed just out of reach because of circumstances beyond their control. Determined to do more, Barron picked up his phone and dialed Clara, his most trusted advisor. "I want to do something bigger," he said, his voice resolute. "Bigger?" Clara asked, intrigued. "I don't just want to help Ethan," Barron explained. "There are hundreds, maybe thousands of children like him. Kids who have talent, passion, and dreams, but don't have the resources to make them a reality. I want to change that. I want to create something lasting." There was a brief pause before Clara responded. "You're talking about a foundation, aren't you?" Barron nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Yes, a foundation that doesn't just give money, but actively seeks out kids who need a chance and connects them with people who can help them thrive. Clara exhaled, her mind already racing through logistics. All right, this is going to be a major undertaking, Barron, but if you're serious about it, I'll start drafting up a plan. I'm very serious, he assured her. Let's call it the Beacon of Hope Foundation. The name felt right. A beacon wasn't just a source of light. It was a symbol of guidance, of hope for those who had been lost in the darkness. That's what he wanted this foundation to be. The next morning, Barron met with a team of experts, philanthropists, educators, doctors, and business leaders, all people who had the knowledge and skills to bring his vision to life. As they sat around the large conference table, Barron laid out his idea, a foundation dedicated to helping children not just survive, but thrive. This isn't about writing checks and walking away, Barron explained. This is about real, tangible support. We'll provide medical assistance, mentorship programs, scholarships, creative opportunities, whatever it takes to make sure no child's potential goes to waste. His passion was infectious. By the time the meeting ended, everyone in the room was on board, each offering their own expertise to help build the foundation from the ground up. But Barron knew the real challenge would be securing funding. His own wealth could only take it so far. He needed partners, people who believed in the mission just as much as he did. As word of Barron's new initiative spread, support flooded in, but so did criticism. Some called it a publicity stunt, dismissing his efforts as nothing more than an attempt to rehabilitate his family's name. Others, including powerful figures in the corporate world, saw his foundation as a threat, an unwelcome disruption to a system that thrived on keeping people desperate and dependent. One major donor who had initially promised to contribute a significant sum suddenly withdrew his support. When Clara pressed him for an explanation, his response was chillingly blunt. "I've been advised to stay away. People in high places aren't happy about this." Clara relayed the conversation to Barron that evening. "They're trying to shut you down before you even get started," she warned. Barron sat in silence for a moment, then met her gaze with determination. Let them try. He wasn't going to back down. If anything, this resistance only proved how necessary his foundation was. Just as Barron was preparing for a fundraising event to secure more support, Clara handed him an envelope. "This came in today," she said. "You might want to read it." Barron opened the letter and immediately recognized the handwriting. It was Ethan's. "Dear Mr. Barron, I heard that people are trying to stop your foundation. I don't understand why. All I know is that because of you, I have hope. Because of you, I'm getting better. You taught me that kindness matters, so I wanted to help too. I've been selling my drawings at the gallery, and I saved up $72. It's not much, but I want you to have it for the foundation. Thank you for everything. Love, Ethan." Barron's hands trembled slightly as he held the letter. His chest tightened with emotion, and for the first time in a long while, he felt tears threaten to form. "This," he whispered, his voice raw. "This is why we can't stop." Clara placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Then let's fight," she said firmly. Inspired by Ethan's selflessness, Barron took a new approach. Instead of relying on wealthy donors who could be easily influenced, he turned to the people. He and his team launched a grassroots campaign, sharing stories of children who needed help, Ethan included. They created a transparent donation system where every dollar went directly toward funding medical treatments, education, and mentorship programs. The response was overwhelming. People from all walks of life, single mothers, working-class families, students, chipped in whatever they could. Some gave a few dollars, others gave more, but the most touching contributions came from children who sent in their allowances, inspired by Ethan's story. Within weeks, Barron's foundation had raised more money than any single corporate donor had initially promised. But the most powerful moment came during a press conference, where Barron publicly addressed the backlash and accusations against him. "This foundation isn't about me," he stated, standing tall at the podium. "It's about kids like Ethan. Kids who have been told their dreams don't matter because they can't afford them. If that makes some people uncomfortable, then so be it. We're not stopping. His words went viral. Supporters flooded social media, rallying behind the cause. The fundraising gala was unlike anything Barron had ever experienced. Families who had been helped by the foundation came forward to share their gratitude. Children who had once been sick, hopeless, or forgotten now stood proudly, proof that his mission was working. But the most emotional moment came when Jacob took the stage, with Ethan by his side. "I came here months ago full of anger," Jacob admitted, gripping the microphone with trembling hands. "I thought no one cared, but Barron Trump proved me wrong." He turned to his son, his voice thick with emotion. "My boy is alive today because of this foundation, because of you." The audience erupted in applause, but Barron sat quietly, humbled by the moment. As the event came to a close, Ethan approached him, a new painting in his hands. "This is for you," he said, his voice shy but filled with gratitude. Barron took the painting and studied it. It was of a tree, its branches stretching toward the sky, bathed in golden light. Beneath it, two figures stood together, one tall, one small. "You saved me," Ethan said simply, "and because of you, I know I can save others too." Barron's throat tightened, and for the first time that night, he let himself smile. This was why he did it. Not for applause, not for recognition, but for the ripple effect of kindness. And as he looked out into the crowd, into the faces of people whose lives had been forever changed, he knew this was only the beginning. As the Beacon of Hope Foundation gained traction, Barron Trump found himself facing more obstacles than he had ever anticipated. While the outpouring of public support had been overwhelming, it had also made waves in circles that thrived on maintaining the status quo. Some influential figures in the corporate and political world saw his foundation as a threat, a disruption to the carefully controlled system where power, wealth, and opportunity were distributed only to those deemed worthy. One morning, Clara stormed into Barron's office, her face pale, her hands gripping a stack of documents. "We have a problem," she said, her voice tight with urgency. Barron looked up from his laptop, immediately sensing the tension in her demeanor. "What is it?" he asked. Clara slammed the papers onto his desk. "We've been hit with a lawsuit." Barron furrowed his brows and picked up the top page. His eyes scanned the words, his grip tightening with each line. It was an accusation of financial mismanagement, a claim that the foundation had been misusing funds. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "Everything we've done has been transparent. Every donation, every expense. It's all accounted for." Clara nodded. "I know, but this isn't about the truth. It's about silencing you." Barron exhaled slowly, his jaw clenching. He had expected pushback, but this was more than a simple smear campaign. This was a direct attack on everything he was trying to build. "We're not backing down," he said firmly. Clara smirked. "I figured you'd say that." Determined to prove the accusations false, Barron called an emergency meeting with his legal team. They worked tirelessly, gathering every financial record, every piece of evidence that proved the foundation's legitimacy. Meanwhile, Clara began digging deeper into the origins of the lawsuit. It didn't take long before they found the connection. "The people behind this," Clara said one evening, her voice tinged with frustration, "are the same ones who pressured our donors to pull out. There's a network of powerful interests who don't want you interfering in their control over charity funding." Barron felt his blood boil. He had always known corruption ran deep, but to see it laid out so clearly was infuriating. These people weren't just trying to discredit him, they were actively working to keep resources away from those who needed them most. "They're afraid," Clara continued. "Afraid that if people see what real generosity looks like, they'll start questioning why their money hasn't been helping the way it should." Barron's mind raced. He knew he couldn't fight this battle behind closed doors. If they wanted to shut him down, he'd take the fight directly to the public. Instead of issuing a standard legal statement, Barron made a bold move. He scheduled a live-streamed press conference and invited every major media outlet. Standing at the podium, he faced the cameras with calm determination. "There have been accusations against the Beacon of Hope Foundation," he began, his voice steady. "Let me be clear, these allegations are false. We have nothing to hide. And to prove that, we are opening our financial records to the public." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "We invite independent auditors to review every transaction, every donation, and every expense. The truth is, we operate with complete transparency because this foundation was built for the people, not for profit." The media frenzy was immediate. News outlets scrambled to cover the unexpected move, and within hours, financial analysts were publicly verifying the foundation's clean records. The backlash against the corrupt organizations behind the lawsuit was swift. Public pressure forced them to withdraw their legal claim, and within a week, the lawsuit had been dismissed. But Barron wasn't done. Determined to use this victory as momentum, Barron launched a new initiative within the foundation, one aimed at exposing corruption in philanthropy. He called it the Transparency Project, a program that would hold charities accountable, ensuring that donations actually reached those in need. Some of the biggest names in philanthropy resisted, but Barron had the public's trust on his side. His team began investigating organizations with histories of misused funds, bringing their findings to light. One evening, Clara walked into Barron's office with a smirk. "You're not going to believe this," she said, handing him her phone. Barron's eyes widened as he read the headline. "Major charity under investigation after Barron Trump's foundation uncovers financial misconduct." The article detailed how a well-known organization had been funneling donations into executive bonuses instead of aid programs. Thanks to the Transparency Project, legal action had been taken, forcing the charity to reform or shut down. Barron exhaled, a sense of satisfaction washing over him. "This is only the beginning," he said. Just as Barron was wrapping up for the night, his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. Curious, he answered. "Hello?" A familiar voice came through the line. "Mr. Barron?" It was Jacob. Barron's lips quirked into a smile. "Jacob, it's good to hear from you. How's Ethan?" Jacob chuckled, his voice lighter than Barron had ever heard it. "He's doing great, better than ever, actually. That's why I'm calling." Barron leaned back in his chair. "Oh?" Jacob hesitated for a moment, then continued. "Ethan saw what you did on the news about exposing those corrupt charities. He wanted me to tell you he's proud of you." Barron felt his throat tighten. He had never been one to seek validation, but hearing those words from Ethan, a boy who had once felt abandoned by the world, meant more to him than he could express. "Hell said you're the reason he believes in people again," Jacob added. "And, well, so do I." For the first time in a long while, Barron felt a deep sense of peace. "Thank you, Jacob," he said softly. "That means more than you know." As he ended the call, Barron looked out his office window, the city lights twinkling below. The fight wasn't over. There would always be challenges, always be people trying to tear down what he built. But he wasn't afraid, because now, more than ever, he understood the truth. It wasn't about fighting for recognition. It wasn't about proving people wrong. It was about doing the right thing, no matter how difficult. And as long as there were people like Ethan, like Jacob, like the countless families who had placed their trust in him, he would keep fighting. Because that was what true leadership meant. And no amount of money or power in the world could change that. The Beacon of Hope Foundation had become more than just a charity, it was a movement. Families across the country were reaching out, seeking help and offering their gratitude. But as the foundation's reach expanded, so did the number of people who wanted to tear it down. Barron Trump had learned long ago that kindness often came with resistance. There would always be those who feared the power of genuine goodwill. Late one evening, Barron sat in his office, sifting through letters from children and families the foundation had helped. Each one told a story of resilience, of gratitude, of lives changed by a simple act of compassion. But his thoughts were interrupted when Clara stormed in, a look of sheer frustration on her face. "You're not going to like this," she said, tossing a thick file onto his desk. Barron picked it up and flipped through the pages. His expression darkened. "They're shutting us down," she said bluntly. Barron's jaw clenched. "Who?" Clara crossed her arms. "A group of corporate donors. Big names. They're pulling their funding, citing mismanagement concerns. But we both know what this is really about. They don't want us exposing their corruption. They've pressured government regulators into launching an investigation into our financial records." Barron exhaled sharply, setting the file down. He had expected pushback, but not like this. Not a full-scale attack meant to cripple the foundation. Clara continued, her voice laced with anger. "They want to freeze our accounts. If this goes through, we won't be able to pay for the medical treatments, the educational programs. Everything we've built will collapse." Barron's mind raced. The foundation wasn't just a cause to him, it was a lifeline for countless families who depended on it. If they lost funding now, children like Ethan, like Sophia, would be left with nowhere to turn. "Then we don't let them win," Barron said finally. His voice was calm, but the fire in his eyes was undeniable. Clara smirked. "I was hoping you'd say that." The next morning, Barron took action. Instead of issuing a statement, he went directly to the people, the families who had been helped by the foundation. A live stream was set up in the foundation's headquarters. When the camera rolled, Barron spoke directly to the public. "We've been accused of mismanagement," he said, his voice steady. "But the truth is, this isn't about finances. It's about power. There are people who don't want us helping those in need because it challenges their control." He leaned forward. "So, here's my response. We're not stopping. We're not backing down. And if you believe in what we're doing, I ask you, stand with us." The reaction was instant. The live stream went viral within hours. People from all walks of life, families, activists, and even celebrities began showing their support. "Stand with Barron" started trending worldwide. Donations flooded in, not from corporations, but from everyday people who wanted to make a difference. Small contributions, $10 here, $20 there, began adding up to millions. The foundation didn't just survive the attack, it thrived. But even as the foundation stood strong, Barron knew he had to take this fight beyond public support. He needed to confront those who had tried to take him down. Through careful research, Clara had uncovered the names of the key figures behind the attempted shutdown. They weren't just corporate leaders. They were deeply connected to government agencies that had long benefited from controlling where charity funds flowed. One evening, Barron walked into a high-preface-run fundraising event where several of these figures were in attendance. He didn't go alone. He brought Jacob and Ethan with him, living proof of what the foundation had accomplished. As he made his way through the room, he was met with cold stares. But Barron wasn't here to play politics. He was here to make them face the truth. One of the men, a billionaire businessman who had led the push to defund the foundation, approached him with a smug smile. "You've made quite a name for yourself," the man said, swirling his glass of wine. "But you should know when to step aside. There are bigger forces at play here." Barron held his gaze, unfazed. "That's where you're wrong," he said, "because the biggest force in the world isn't wealth or influence. It's people who care enough to stand together." The businessman scoffed. "You think your little movement can change the system?" "I know it can," Barron replied, "because it already has." At that moment, Ethan stepped forward, his small hand clutching Barron's sleeve. He looked up at the billionaire and said, "You're wrong. Mr. Barron helped save my life, and because of him, I get to grow up. I get to dream." The businessman's face faltered. Around them, people had begun to listen. Murmurs spread. Barron knelt beside Ethan and put a hand on his shoulder. "And I'll keep fighting," he promised. "Not just for you, but for every kid out there who deserves a future." Silence fell over the room. The powerful elite had underestimated Barron Trump, but now they knew he wasn't going anywhere. The battle was far from over, but one thing was certain. He had already won the most important fight of all, the fight for hope. As the dust settled from the Foundation's battle, Barron Trump took a moment to reflect. The past few months had been a whirlwind, facing corporate sabotage, standing up against powerful figures, and proving that kindness was stronger than greed. But he wasn't finished. This wasn't just about saving the Foundation. It was about making sure no family was ever left behind again. One evening, Barron sat in his office, skimming through letters from children and families who had been impacted by the Beacon of Hope Foundation. Each story reaffirmed why he had started this mission. But one letter stood out. A simple, handwritten note from Ethan. "Dear Mr. Barron, you said I was brave, but I think you're the bravest person I know. Because of you, my dad smiles again. Because of you, I get to grow up and chase my dreams. One day, I want to help kids like you helped me. Thank you for everything. Love, Ethan." Barron felt a lump rise in his throat. This was the true meaning of his work. Not headlines, not applause, but real change in the lives of real people. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of responsibility settling over him. He had started this journey thinking he could make a difference. Now he realized he had ignited something much bigger than himself. The next morning, Barron called a meeting with his team. "We've won this fight," he said, scanning the determined faces around the table. "But our work isn't over. We need to expand. We need to reach more kids. Kids like Ethan, like Sophia. And we're not waiting for permission." Clara, ever the pragmatist, raised an eyebrow. "That's ambitious," she admitted. "But if anyone can pull it off, it's you." Barron nodded. "This isn't just a foundation anymore. It's a movement. We're going to build community centers, scholarship programs, medical initiatives. We're going to be there before families even have to ask for help." The room buzzed with excitement. They weren't just continuing the fight, they were redefining it. A few weeks later, at the Foundation's annual gala, Jacob and Ethan took the stage. Ethan, now healthier and filled with confidence, held a framed drawing in his hands. It was a picture of children playing under a bright sun, their hands outstretched toward a figure in the center. "Barron. This is for you, Mr. Barron," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Because you didn't just change my life. You changed all of ours." The room erupted in applause, but Barron wasn't focused on the crowd. He was focused on Ethan. The boy who once refused to hope, now standing tall in front of the world. In that moment, Barron Trump realized this was only the beginning. The ripple of kindness he had started was turning into a wave, and nothing was going to stop it now. Barron Trump's story reminds us of the power of kindness, resilience, and standing up for what is right. In a world often divided by privilege and struggle, he chose to listen, to act, and to make a real difference, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. His journey proves that even the smallest act of compassion can create ripples that change lives forever. This isn't just a story about Barron, it's about all of us. It's about choosing empathy over judgment, action over indifference. In today's fast-pacing world, we all have the power to uplift someone, to stand for justice, and to be a force for good. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Like this video, subscribe for more inspiring content, and share it with others. Let's spread the message that kindness, above all else, has the power to change the world.